Have you ever had that feeling that somewhere along the way, life just sort of took over? That the big, exciting dreams you had when you were younger got tucked away in a box somewhere? Well, we're about to dive into a story that's all about that feeling. And it asks one heck of a question. Is it ever really too late to start over? I mean, just look at this. It says it all, right? At 19, you're going to build something incredible. You're going to change the world. Fast forward to 42, and the goal is just pay the school fees. The dream shifts from making a mark to just making it through the month. And that is the exact tension at the heart of the story we're getting into.
So let's start with part 1, life on autopilot. This is where we meet our guy, Rajesh. He's 42, and from the outside, everything looks fine, totally stable, totally secure. But on the inside, he was just going through the motions, you know? The big dreams he once had were just fading into the background noise of everyday life.
And this is what that autopilot life looked like. A rented apartment, a job in accounting that was steady, but man, was it boring. A couple of great kids who are growing up way too fast. And then there were these notebooks, just sitting there, filled with all these old ideas. They were basically a physical reminder of a time when taking risks seemed more important than just being responsible.
Okay, so this brings us to part 2, the moment everything shifted. For Rajesh, it wasn't some huge, dramatic midlife crisis. Nope, it was something way smaller, way quieter. It was just a simple question from his son that ended up changing, well, everything.
And there it is, the question that started it all. His 14-year-old son just casually asks, "Papa, did you always want to be an accountant?" And Rajesh kind of laughs it off, you know? He tells him no, that he actually used to dream of starting his own company. And he figured, okay, conversation over. But it wasn't over. Because then his son hit him with this. "Then why didn't you?" Wow. Just 4 little words, but they just sliced right through 2 decades of excuses and all the reasons he told himself why he couldn't. That was the one. That was the question that wouldn't let go. And you can just imagine the impact. He couldn't sleep that night. He's just lying there staring at the ceiling with that question, "Why didn't you?" just echoing in his head. It forced him to really look at himself and ask a new, much harder question. When did I get so scared? So what happens after a moment like that? Well, that brings us to part 3, the 2-hour dream. This is where the real work starts. And what's so powerful here is that the biggest changes, they don't always start with a huge announcement. Sometimes they start with a quiet, consistent little effort. And I think this is so important. The next day, he didn't quit his job. He didn't make some big dramatic post on social media. He just started. Quietly. No fanfare, just the decision to begin. Now, this slide shows you the brutal reality of what that meant. He was still working his 9-to-6 job. He was still a husband and a dad from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. The only time left for his dream was this little 2-hour window at the end of the day, from 10 till midnight. It had to have been completely exhausting, but it was a start. And on those nights when he probably felt like giving up, he'd think about Colonel Sanders, who started KFC in his 60s. And he started to reframe his whole mindset. This quote just nails it. He realized, you know what? Maybe 42 isn't late. Maybe it's just mature. His age wasn't a weakness, it was a strength. So he's putting in all this silent, late-night work. But did it actually lead to anything? Well, in part 4, we see how all those small, consistent steps started to build some real momentum. And more importantly, how he started to actually believe in that kid with the notebooks again. For 4 long months, he worked till midnight, probably wondering if he was crazy. And then, a breakthrough. It wasn't some massive contract. It was just one happy client who told a friend about him. But that tiny win, that was everything. It was the first little piece of proof that his old dream wasn't just a dream. It had real value. And that one little win started to snowball. Get this. Within a single year, his little side project, his 2-hour-a-night dream, was bringing in 50% of his full-time salary. Just think about that. That's not just a hobby anymore. That's proof. That's the moment the dream starts to feel incredibly, undeniably real. And that all leads to this moment, the big one. 2 years after his son asked him that simple question, at 44 years old, Rajesh did it. He walked away from that stable, boring, secure job he'd had for most of his adult life. He resigned. So he quits his job. End of story, right? Well, not quite. Quitting wasn't the end goal. It was the beginning of the next chapter. And that brings us to our final part, the real definition of success. Because as we're about to see,
It had almost nothing to do with getting rich or famous.
So if you map it out, the whole transformation took about 5 years. It started at 42, with that hard question that forced him to face his fears. At 44, he took the big leap of faith. And by the time he was 47, he had found what he was really looking for all along.
And this right here, this is the core of the whole story. Years later, his son, now a young man, asked him if he was happy. Rajesh said yes. Not because he was a millionaire, but because he had finally answered his son's first question. He proved to himself that it's not too late. You can restart.
So what are the big takeaways from all this? First, middle age isn't the end of the road. It can be a brand new starting line. Second, look, stability is nice. It's comfortable. But true fulfillment, that comes from growth. And maybe most important of all, your dreams don't have an expiration date. But that fear holding you back, that definitely does.
So as we wrap this up, I'll just leave you with this to think about. Rajesh had those notebooks full of ideas he had set aside for later. What about you? What's the dream that you filed away telling yourself you'd get to it someday? Maybe, just maybe, someday is now.